uh, kind of got to me this past week because I read quite a lot about it, and it really did bother me what happened, and also the reaction to it, and the kind of two-faced kind of back and forth about it just didn't seem to make sense. Talking point is quite simple. It's about booing in stadiums. Last weekend, of course, Hungary, who were playing behind closed doors, but they had a lot of children there with their adults who were meant to take them. So kids under 14. There was 30,000, I think, in the beautiful, beautiful Pushka Stadium in Budapest, which is actually right next to one of the main Keleti railway station and close to one of the very best shopping centres in Hungary. The kids were booing. Okay, so the kids booed when the players took a knee in support of Black Lives Matter, of course. Now, Gareth Southgate, of course, he was kind of okay with it, or not okay, but he sort of said, well, when he came out, there was a bit of pantomime booing for England coming out. England, of course, didn't win that game, which made it a little bit worse, but the kids booed. For me, I'm going to start, Andrew, you with this. Fans booing and taking the knee. We've covered this before many, many times. What was the point of taking the knee in Budapest? Was to say we're going to sort of make sure that you know your place?
Well, I think firstly we do need to remember that the England squad and Southgate has been a vocal focal point of this, have been consistent with taking the knee. They made it a point to do that for a while now. And I think there's no point trying to skirt around the issue. Going to anywhere in Central Eastern Europe, the mentality of a lot of English fans, the players will be, well, this is a place we think possibly we need to do it even more, simply because of the laws in those countries. Now, the incidents that have happened give them justification for it. On one sense, if that is the process they choose to make, then it would be almost hypocritical not to take the knee going to Hungary. A reaction to the booing, well, I mean, by now they'll be used to it. There's been a lot of booing in various sections, not just in other countries. I should point out certain areas of England itself when England have been playing home games. So it's not specific to any other country. If you're going to make a protest and you believe in it, and from what we've heard from Southgate and the players, that's their chosen form of protest, they have to be consistent and keep doing it for as long as they feel they need to. At the same time, I would say there can't be a great deal of shock or surprise. They have to understand whether they like it or agree with it or not. People have different viewpoints. People may not agree with that form of protest. Maybe they agree with the point, but not that form of protest. So they have to understand just as their right to protest should be protected, so should other people's to voice their opinion, as long as it doesn't get into, really serious abuse. Booing, just booing, I don't think anybody, whether you agree with the point of view, can attack people for simply voicing their opinion, because that's exactly what a protest is on the other side of the coin.
Isold, Andrew's right. Actually, it's a protest against this, that they're, I've been in Hungary many times. I've done work there. I've actually played sports there as well. I've had no problem, but then again, I'm not coloured, so that's a big sort of like thing to mention that is the case. The reaction to it is sort of like it was screaming, because just as something that we had discussed, for example, death threats and booing of Harry Maguire when he plays for England.
Yeah, so I think that they would say, yeah, it's booing, and it's not necessarily shouting of abusive things that may go so far as to be racist comments in response to what is a protest that's trying to highlight issues to do with racism in sport and just in general in life. But unfortunately, I think the issue, and Gareth Southgate perhaps touched on it, while you can't sanction booing, it perhaps gives you an indication of the mindset. If you have children of that age whose instant reaction is to boo when they see the Black Lives Matter protest. And I think it's also extremely important, as Andrew rightly said, for teams to, if you have made this your stance, you carry on. irrespective of the booing, irrespective of anything else, because these are players who do have black teammates, and they're participating for a reason. And I think for unity as a team, if you decide you're going to do any sort of thing, you have to be consistent in whether it's protest, whether it's an approach to training. Your consistency is key, and it also gives a clear message to your fans that if this is something you believe in, the players are going to take a knee. Are you going to really boo your own players? And unfortunately, in the case of English fans, that is something that happens, which is in itself alarming. But I think we really have to worry about the environment they're going into when kids feel that it's appropriate to boo that, because it's something they're not necessarily understanding what the protest is. Their difficulty with it is obviously being something that's either being explained to them or learnt at that young an age, and it's disheartening to say the least.
Is it maybe a case, stay with you in this, Isolde, is it a case that the kids and many people feel othered? For example, in Hungary, a very, very simple fact that, when there was the migration of an awful lot of people who came like through Turkey and Greece and came up, Turkey was, overloaded in many senses. I mean, it's not a rich country. They do well. There's a lot of huge pluses in Hungary. However, it was difficult for them to hold that, and there is that kind of resentment of the outside because they're very kind of internal and they've been kicked around for a long time, but they feel othered. And we see that in a lot of Eastern Europe. And it's not that, for example, we'd say like in Russia or in Croatia, I always give the example in Croatia when I heard our Hajduk Split fans throwing peanuts and, making monkey chants and terrible chants against the Roman players, AS Roman players in the UEFA Cup match. And I was trying to figure out, when I asked them, why are you doing that? We have a black player as well. But like, oh yeah, but that's our black player. So, Isel, is it just a case, because we did hear, I said, like the next part is when, this inherited thinking that Gareth Southgate mentioned, and we've seen it. We've seen it, of course. He says it's inherited, but is it a case? Okay, two questions on this. One, is it that these people feel kind of othered, and secondly, are they learning from somewhere else? And I would mention England that.
So yeah, I think in terms of are they feeling othered, well, there's no one who's going to feel more othered than a player who's on a field surrounded by all the fans in the stadium who are booing at him trying to be part of a protest. Like, if you're a black player in that team and that's what you're hearing, you're going to feel a lot more othered than the people in the crowd who feel that as a nationality, people might not necessarily feel the fondest for them when they do things like this. Behavior like that is, and unfortunately, it's not the first of these incidents. Behavior like that is what causes other nations to, whether it's have a certain view on them or look down in a certain perspective, because that reaction, and I think the reaction of the English fans to boo a national anthem, I everything about that I detest in any form of sport. I detest when people boo opposition players, unless there's been a foul, then you can chant and do all of that and you can express your dissatisfaction. But I think there is something inherently wrong where your instant reaction at a sporting event, which is meant to be a tournament between two teams based on their competitive merits, and the idea is sport should be inherently fair, and you're going out to boo a national anthem. The problem there is the people who think that booing a national anthem is appropriate, the people who think booing a protest is appropriate. Like, their moral compass, like, I'm presuming they're all going to be signing up to watch all of the Live Golf tournaments because they have their own moral compass issues as far as I can tell. But there needs to be something more done, that these sort of people are made feel marginalized as opposed to part of the group, and particularly in England. That's a much more straightforward thing to say. You should be in the minority in England booing a national anthem. You shouldn't be in the majority.
Andrew, remember we had Jack Parrott, of course, who was at the European Championship final last year, and he told us about how he felt, it was dangerous, but also that he couldn't understand the booing, and he wanted to say to some people, "Why are you booing?" He's an English fan, proud English fan, and he wanted to say, "Why are you booing?" But he was kind of afraid. And I will say this big plus to the English media, because people say, well, what about, look what the English fans did. Listen what they were doing. Yeah, the English media wrote about it. They might have othered, some people say, oh, well, it's like the Liverpool fans, it's okay for them to boo the English anthem because, like, Liverpool's very oppressed. That to me is a lot of bollocks. Excuse me, but I think that's nonsense. Like if you don't have to boo, just stay silent. Just turn your back on the field, do something. But to boo is like, look at me, I'm so oppressed. Andrew, we're giving the English fans a kicking, but I also was remembering this with their booing, taking a knee against for Croatia last year.
Exactly. Yeah.
And of course, Gareth said there's inherited thinking, which is probably it's right. As Liesl said, this has been handed down. This is something that's there. They hear around, they feel around them. But Boris Johnson, when the English fans are booing last year, he and Priti Patel, of course, who have just sent down Afghans down to Africa. Again, I do not understand whatsoever. He said, well, we can't, because if Gareth Southgate is saying like that they're being influenced by older people, older adults, Boris Johnson had something very different to say. He basically said that he fully respects the right of those who choose to peacefully protest and make their feelings known. Andrew, that's what you said. It's a protest against a protest.
Well, look, this is. Some people look at this issue on different levels. Some people will look at it just purely on racism. Is it good or bad? If you do one, then you support it. If you do the other, you don't. Nobody in their right minds who is sane can obviously outright support racism and be a remotely respectable person. That's obviously a given. I'm not going to back Boris Johnson here because nobody in their right mind would do that either. But I think he's trying to be the Ricky Gervais of politicians here. We know how much Ricky Gervais loves to say, I've got to defend all free speech. And there was one of his stand-up shows when he went on and on about how he was defending somebody who was criticizing him because free speech should be an absolute golden benchmark. Now, I think there's some, and I mean only some, element of truth behind that. I go back to what I was saying earlier. Both forms are a form of protest, the actual taking the knee and the booing it. But I think there has to be a line drawn at some point. I think actually Gareth Southgate's point was a very good one. It's this conditioned thinking that's been passed down a generation where actually not a lot of thought as to why you are booing has been educated to the younger generation. It's just a popular thing to do. I think, honestly, without having been there, I think I'm fairly safe to say that's probably why a lot of those 30,000 14-year-olds were booing. Because, well, everybody else is. Not, I actively dislike this particular form of protest. I don't want racism, but I don't support this because the movement itself has become politicized or whatever it is. I very much doubt some 14-year-old Hungarians are thinking on that level, that depth of disagreement with taking the knee. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Not everybody's booing for the same reasons. Some people may genuinely believe, look, I abhor racism. I just don't believe this is the form of protest that makes a difference. It's virtue signaling. They may say this is virtue signaling, and that is doing more damage than good. Some people will genuinely say that, and I think you have to at least listen to that side of the conversation. But there will be a lot more who are simply booing because they think, I don't like that player, how he looks. How do you distinguish the two? You can't.
No, I'm going to leave Lisa with the last word in this. So I will say that with Garrett, I mean, I like him, admire him. I think he was a very good player. He's been a very good coach. He will go in English history as a very, very good coach. But of course, he's one person. That's a topic like learning from the older people. He is in a position of power, an older, statesman, shall we say, in the world of football. He had no problem bringing Dr. Rob Chakravarty into the English mix, a guy who was under investigation for giving injections, very high doses of L-carnitine to Mo Salah when he was working with UK Athletics, as well as other things he was up to as well, that were basically hushed up, and he was removed then from UK Athletics and taken over to the English football team. Of course, if you think about it, Gareth Southgate had no problem bringing in a doctor who didn't even write down, didn't even make notes of what he was injecting into people. But he's going to work with these racehorses and as in players. And what was the first thing he did when he came in? He wrote to all the English Premier League clubs and said, I want them all to be checked for thyroid problems. Why? Because with thyroid problems, they can get injections to keep them slim. So Gareth, go with God. Esau, very quick last one. Just what can be done? 2 words. What can be done?
Very little. Unfortunately, because
I asked you words, you gave it to us.
And Andrew has it quite spot on. You can't differentiate between which fans are booing because everyone around you is booing and you're a teenager and you're joining in. Which fans are booing going, I'm against this protest, or which fans are booing because they're just racists. What needs to be done, I think, to an extent, is that as long as, and this goes for English fans too, if you have fans who, you put up signs, the same way you do in rugby where it says respect the kicker, you put up signs and you say respect the anthem, and you go, do you know what? Every time we've people doing this, or every time we've people who are booing aggressively when there's a minute's silence or a peaceful protest, which kneeling, taking the knee is a peaceful form of protest. You come down hard in the FA. You say to them, look guys, we're not going to have this. Either your fans learn how to behave better or we're going to keep sanctioning you. Because at the end of the day, if you start removing fans or you start having consequences for the various countries, their national teams, fan behaviour will change because it'll be forced on them. And whether they go away and they still have their racist thoughts outside the game, fine. Just don't make it uncomfortable for the players who you turned up to watch.
The one thing about booing, for example, the national anthem, or booing booing national anthem is an offence according to UEFA, but booing a team taking the knee or making a Nazi salute or doing a funny walk is not.